In 1983, a young Al Jourgensen stood in a London studio listening to pop lyrics being read to him over the phone by a powerful record executive. It was a far cry from the industrial metal pioneer he would later become. The story of Ministry's debut album with Sympathy is a fascinating tale of artistic compromise, rebellion, and redemption, featuring dumpster diving for popcorn, $1,000 autographs, and a frontman who spent decades refusing to even mention the album by name. But how did Jourgensen end up making a synth-pop record that would haunt him for years? And what finally led him to make peace with his most controversial creation? Before we start, guys, let me know in the comment section if you want more Ministry videos, since there's a lot to cover in the band's history. Before we get started, be sure to hit the bell notification icon and put all notifications on. I hear from a lot of my subscribers that they don't even get notifications when I post my videos. Born Alejandro Ramirez Casas on October 9th, 1958 in Havana, Cuba, Al Jourgensen's first memory was one of terror, fleeing Cuba with his grandmother on an overcrowded plane following Castro's revolution. After arriving in the United States, he took the surname Jourgensen from his Norwegian stepfather, whom his mother married in the mid-60s. Growing up, Jourgensen's musical journey began with the Beatles' second album, which featured hits like She Loves You and Roll Over Beethoven, which became his first pop obsession. His tastes evolved during his teenage years in Denver, encompassing progressive rock acts like Pink Floyd and Hawkwind, with particular fondness for their Space Ritual album. He also developed an appreciation for Led Zeppelin's power and the raw emotion of country music stars like Hank Williams and George Jones. His rebellious streak emerged pretty early on. He moved out before finishing high school, supporting himself, working while pursuing his education. His musical trajectory changed dramatically, though, after attending a Ramones concert in Denver during the late 70s. The show's raw energy inspired him to transform his appearance overnight, adopting a mohawk and diving into punk rock. As the 80s rolled around, his influences also included Motown sounds. Before Ministry, Jourgensen played in several outfits. He told Rolling Stone that he played in a metal cover band in 1978, oddly enough called Slayer. This was, of course, before the well-known band Slayer was established. After Slayer, he played in a Gang of Four-ish type band called Special Effect. That group included future Concrete Blonde drummer Harry Rushikoff. They released the Mood Music EP in 1979 and their only album, Too Much Soft Living, in 1981. At the insistence of their manager, the band left Chicago for San Francisco because they thought the city would be far more receptive to their dance rock sound. But things didn't pan out when they moved to the Pacific Coast. The band members' personalities clashed and the city proved to be too expensive to live in. The band soon retreated to Chicago, with Jourgensen trying to keep a low profile as rumors were starting to swirl around town about how the band failed out west. Jourgensen soon spent his time working at a record store by day and DJing at a local club called 950 on weekends. He was still working on his music, telling Rolling Stone that he was messing around with keyboards and writing poppier stuff. He soon bought an ARP Omni synthesizer, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and rhythm box, adding how he made tapes where he played all the instruments. One of the songs born during this period was the track I'm Falling, which Jourgensen compared to the Cure and Joy Division, with his own fake British vocals. But he had no real plans to do anything with the music that he was creating. He had developed a friendship with a guy named Jim Nash, who was the owner of the nationally known Wax Trax record retail outlet on Lincoln Avenue, where Jourgensen was living at the time. Nash had also launched a namesake label on which he'd released odd records by Divine, Striker Under, and Strange Circuits. He liked the music that Jourgensen had come up with and urged him to go to the studio to properly record it. Jourgensen admitted in his book that he had no interest in singing, so he ended up auditioning a dozen or so vocalists, all of which he wasn't a fan of. Jourgensen soon headed to Head and West recording studio to lay down the songs, with Wax Trax issuing the I'm Falling single, which also featured Primental and Cold Life. According to the frontman, the single sold about 15 to 20,000 copies, and it went to number 40 on the dance charts. It was after this that record labels soon came knocking. The record label Situation 2 also released a single in Europe, with Jourgensen remarking in his book, "I think they wanted everyone in Europe to think we were gay because the cover art had 4 naked dudes lying on their stomachs like they're sunbathing or something. When we went over there to do press, all these journalists asked suggestive questions and some of them started coming on to me. I was like, get away from me, I'm not gay." The frontman soon started to focus a lot on his music, adding how he fit 3 years of work into just 6 months, operating on 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night during this period in his life while he was also working 2 jobs. He added that he had no time for sleep and it was a choice between drinking or sleeping, and he chose the latter. He also remarked how Ministry sounded so different from the other bands, telling the Monitor newspaper, "We don't sound like everybody else. We don't have a Los Angeles sound like Missing Persons in Berlin and all these other LA bands that all sound the same." He also remarked how in doing early press for With Sympathy, that the band mostly kept to themselves and minded their own business in the Chicago music scene, which he stated was rife with jealousy. It was Ministry's strategy of playing outside of Chicago and establishing a good-sized following in New York City and, of course, bugging record labels that got them a lot of attention. In fact, Ministry turned down a lot of the initial offers they got early on in their career. All while this was going on, Jourgensen's musical tastes also included Gang of Four, Thelonious Monks, Sex Pistols, Buzzcocks, and Killing Joke. He remarked, "It was just like, I'm throwing out the synthesizers and I'm going to do a lot more guitar." He recalled in his book, "When we got back to Chicago, I got a call from an A&R guy at Arista Records saying that Clive Davis, the head of the label, wanted to sign us. I met with him and he made me all these pie-in-the-sky promises and claimed he could make Ministry the next Joy Division, which is kind of what I want it to be. But in reality, the promises were just hot air." He went on to add that from the start, Davis envisioned Ministry to be a gay teeny bopper pop band, adding, "So I basically signed my life away with a handshake and got a stack of cash. To be fair, the money was good because it allowed me to leave the apartment I was squatting in. I was literally living in squalor, but I seriously had no idea the shit I was getting into or what the stipulations of the contract were." He later added that his management team was actually in cahoots with the label. Jourgensen started submitting songs to his label to give them an idea of what he wanted to work on. These songs, which the frontman referred to as being dark electronic stuff with an edge, later ended up on the albums Twitch and The Land of Honey. But Clive Davis hated the songs. The songs that the label did accept included tracks like Revenge and Effigy, which were cleaned up by the appointed engineer and producer to make them more palatable to a pop audience. The frontman also assumed a fake English accent for the songs, which he later expressed regret about. He admitted to Rolling Stone that he was living in London during this period of time, and that affected the way that he sang. Arista soon appointed producer Vince Ellie and Ian Taylor, as well as engineer David Woolley, against Jourgensen's wishes. He remarked how there were backup singers that he never hired and musicians who were brought in that he didn't want. He added to Rolling Stone that the flavor of the month that year was the psychedelic furs, so that's why the label brought in the Furs drummer Vince Ellie, as well as their engineer Ian Taylor, despite the fact that Ellie had never produced an album before. On top of that, on some songs like Work for Love, Clive Davis would even call Jourgensen in the studio and read him lyrics to sing over the phone, and he basically went along with it. He revealed he went along with it because after living in a squat, shoveling snow out of my living room, I was like, okay man, whatever you want. Adding, Arista only signed him because basically I think they signed me for having high cheekbones and being a skinny little white guy that was playing pop and funk. The label and his management went as far as making Jourgensen cut his hair and also dressed him up in a bunch of sharkskin suits, with him adding to Rolling Stone, "I felt powerless, naked, vulnerable. It was horrible." When the album was done, Jourgensen went as far as pleading with Clive Davis to not release the record and even stated that he would not promote it, but it fell on deaf ears. Things escalated when he was flown to England to work on the video for Revenge with director Julian Temple, who had previously worked with The Cure. The frontman claimed that he felt like an imposter and he went into a deep depression, and he started to self-medicate, remarking, "I did that album clean and sober, and after that, it was straight downhill." The album was cut at the Car Synchro studio in Boston, and it was during this period Jourgensen said he hated the city, complaining how people were mostly snooty. But amidst all the chaos and frustration in his life, he did find a bright spot. He met Amy Mann prior to her being in the group Till Tuesday. She was playing in a band called Young Snakes, and the pair briefly dated, and she was even for a short period of time in ministry. If you guys are interested in Till Tuesday, I've actually done a whole video on the band's career. The link is down below. Upset with the resulting album, Jourgensen got a good lawyer and sued Arista, claiming the label reneged on their contractual obligations and took advantage of him as an artist. But the label wanted to keep him on their roster and went as far as getting the pop group the Thompson Twins to call up the frontman, urging him to drop the lawsuit and stay on the label and listen to Clive Davis since he could make him a very rich man. He added to Rolling Stone that the label even offered him a boatload of money to stay on the roster, but he didn't recognize what he had become at that point in time. All while this drama was going on, the slick synth pop British-influenced album With Sympathy was finally released in May of 1983. The title of With Sympathy was a reference to the Trax employee Carol Blank, who died in 1982. The record was far removed from the industrial metal direction Ministry later became known for. The opening track Effigy could have been a cry for help, establishing the album's synth pop sound while exploring the themes of identity and rebellion. The lyrics express frustration with being molded into something artificial. This could also be said about the song Here We Go, which addressed conflict and resistance, with the lyrics reflecting struggles against various forces. With Sympathy did get some minor airplay and had 2 songs appear on the Billboard dance chart. I Wanted to Tell Her reached number 13, while Work for Love peaked at number 20. Then in 2016, Jourgensen told Quietus, "It was revolting, disgusting, and traumatized me for years. I was sick to my stomach on a daily basis. I threw up more on that record times 10 than any other." Ministry played about 30 shows opening for the likes of The Police, Madness, Culture Club, Depeche Mode, and Flock of Seagulls. While audiences were receptive to the group, the headlining acts were not. Apart from playing music he hated, Ministry was also broke. Ministry's financial situation was so bad that during a gig opening for Depeche Mode, Jourgensen went dumpster diving behind a theater to find popcorn. He remarked how a 5-pound bag of popcorn could feed the whole band and crew. Broke, Jourgensen returned to Chicago, got a job at Trax Records working the register, but after only 3 days on the job, he punched a customer who was taunting him. Fearful of lawsuits, the frontman got moved to the back of the store shrink-wrapping vinyl. He eventually signed a deal with Trax. So if Jourgensen could go back in time, what would he have changed on With Sympathy? Well, he told Rolling Stone it would have been a lot more keyboard-oriented. He added, "I was going through my keyboard phase because everybody was. As a matter of fact, Arista turned down Halloween and All Day and a bunch of other songs because Clive Davis pretty much wanted to write my songs." But I do want to point out in the story that Bob Roberts, who played keys on With Sympathy, had given an interview several years ago that seemed to conflict with what Jourgensen had said all these years about With Sympathy. He stated, "Certainly he seemed to be into it at the time, more so than anyone else." But Roberts added that the record didn't reflect how Ministry sounded on stage, and when asked about these comments, Jourgensen said that Roberts wasn't in London with the group when they were getting calls from Clive Davis. While the frontman swore off the album for decades and at one point not even mentioning it by name, in more recent years it seems like he softened his stance against it. In 2014, he shared with fans an unreleased track from this era titled Anything for You. He admitted to Yahoo Entertainment that his view on the album changed when one night he was drunk and went to see a Ministry cover band in LA that only did songs from With Sympathy. He was impressed with the audience's response. He went back and listened to the album for the first time in decades, and while he still hated it, he could finally understand why people were into the album, and he finally realized it's not worth being angry about. Jourgensen revealed for years he would sign anything that fans asked him to except for With Sympathy. There was one interview where he jokingly said that he would sign the album if fans paid him $1,000. Then one day a fan took him up on the offer and paid him the money, which resulted in him signing the record. As for the money, Jourgensen donated it to charity for the organization called Rock for Kids in Chicago. So every now and then fans do pay him $1,000 and he just donates the money. Then a few years later, he told Rolling Stone, "It took me years to stop loathing the album or distancing myself from it. It is what it is. I'm glad that I did the record because then I realized music is not all it's cracked up to be." In a separate interview, he added, "I wouldn't be who I am today. I think without that record, I wouldn't be as much of a maniac douchebag. So I'm thankful for it now." In the year since its release, With Sympathy seems to have found a cult following. The song Effigy was actually featured in the HBO show Euphoria. And in more recent years, Jourgensen remarked how his bandmates knew that he didn't like With Sympathy. He told Rolling Stone, "They came up with all these new versions of all the old songs and then sprung them on me one night on the bus while I was on shrooms. I actually wound up going, hey, that's not bad." In June of 2023, the frontman announced that Ministry would re-record 4 tracks from the album, including Revenge, Effigy, Work for Love, and Here We Go. He remarked how the new versions would be a lot more guitar-driven, but not metal. The frontman also revealed that he had destroyed the master recordings of With Sympathy by burning them. Then on August 24th, 2023, Ministry performed Revenge live for the first time since 1984 in Dallas, Texas. In December of 2023, it was announced that Ministry would be performing at the 2024 Cruel World Festival with a setlist consisting of songs from both With Sympathy and Twitch. The setlist included Revenge, Effigy, and Work for Love, the latter two being performed live for the first time since 1984. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.